He sat alone that night, the lights dimmed, the world silent around him. Steve Harvey had everything a man could dream of: fame, fortune, and millions who laughed at his jokes. Yet in that silence, something deeper haunted him. There was a question that had been chasing him for years, whispering in his heart when the camera stopped rolling. He used to laugh about religion, about faiths he didn't understand, and among them was one he misunderstood the most: Islam. He used to think he knew it all. The news had painted a picture, one filled with fear and confusion. He believed what he saw. He repeated what he heard. But then, life has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. It began the day he met a man, quiet, calm, and unlike anyone he had ever met before. There was something in the man's eyes, something peaceful, something unshakable. Steve had seen confidence before, but never serenity. They sat together after a long flight, the hum of the jet fading into the night. The man took out a small book, worn old, and wrapped carefully in cloth. "This," the man said softly, "is the Qur'an." Steve had heard that name before, but never like this, never with reverence, never with love. Curiosity turned into a strange pull. That night in his hotel room, he searched for verses. He wanted to understand what this book truly said. What he found was not the anger he had been told about, but something far different. Whoever saves one life, it said, is as if he has saved all of mankind. He read it again. The words struck him deep, cutting through years of misunderstanding. Days passed, but he couldn't shake the feeling. It was as if someone had placed a mirror in front of his soul. He began to notice how Muslims around him prayed, how they paused everything, even in airports, in busy streets, just to bow their heads in submission. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a routine. It was love, a discipline that whispered, "You are nothing without him." He remembered mocking that once. He remembered laughing at something he didn't understand. Now, every time he saw them bow, his heart grew heavy. One evening he followed a sound, the call to prayer. It echoed through the air like a haunting melody, ancient and pure. "Allahu Akbar," the voice called, and Steve froze. The world felt still. The sound pierced something inside him, not fear, not confusion, but awe. He stood there, tears filling his eyes, not because he was sad, but because he finally realized how wrong he had been. His whole life he had spoken before listening, judged before knowing, mocked before feeling. He had been blind, not sight, but in spirit. He began to meet scholars, imams, men of knowledge. They didn't try to convert him, they simply taught. They told him about Jesus, not as an enemy of Islam, but as a beloved prophet. That stunned him. For the first time, he realized that Islam wasn't against him. It had never been. It was calling him home, to peace, to humility, to truth. But with truth comes fear. He wrestled with questions, with guilt, with the voice of his past. What will people say? What will the world think? Yet, deep inside, he knew it wasn't about the world anymore. It was about his soul. He had been chasing laughter and applause, but all along, his heart was begging for silence. The kind of silence that only comes from peace with God. He began to pray, not as a Muslim, not as a Christian, but as a man who finally wanted to speak honestly to his Creator. The words came out broken, but sincere. "God, show me the truth." And in that moment, the world around him seemed to fade away. He started reading more. The stories of the prophets, the mercy of Muhammad A, the patience of Job, known in Islam as Ayub, the faith of Maryam, the purity of prayer, the unity of believers. Every line felt like a message written just for him. It wasn't a new religion he found. It was a forgotten truth he had never been told. Then came the hardest part, admitting he was wrong. He stood before his audience one day, trembling not because of the lights, but because of what he was about to confess. He told them he had been wrong, wrong about Islam, wrong about Muslims, wrong about what faith truly meant. The world reacted as expected. Some mocked him, others called him lost. But inside he felt found. He began to visit mosques quietly, without announcement, without cameras. He watched how Muslims greeted one another, how they gave, how they forgave. He saw children memorizing the Qur'an with smiles on their faces. He saw people break bread with strangers. He saw kindness that wasn't performed for likes or applause. And he realized this is what humanity had been missing. There was one night, the night everything changed. He sat under the stars, the Qur'an opened before him. The verse spoke directly to him. Indeed, God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. That was it. The moment his heart surrendered, he didn't announce it to the world. He didn't need to. Faith, he realized, wasn't a performance. It was a whisper between man and God, a quiet return. And so when people now ask him what changed, he smiles. It wasn't a sermon. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't a preacher. It was truth. Truth that had always been there, waiting for him to listen. He looks back now at his old self, loud, certain, blind, and shakes his head. I was completely wrong about Islam, he says softly, completely wrong. Because what he once feared, he now loves. What he once mocked, he now respects. And what he once ignored has now become the peace that carries him through every storm. Sometimes life's greatest revelations come not through victory, but through surrender. And that night, under the quiet stars, Steve Harvey finally surrendered, not to a religion, not to an idea, but to the truth. He thought the story ended there, that the calm he found beneath those stars was the end of his journey. But peace has a way of testing you. The closer you get to truth, the louder the world becomes. Steve began to notice in small things first, the way people looked at him differently, the way interviews shifted tone when he mentioned faith. It was subtle, almost invisible, like the quiet chill before a storm. But deep down, he could feel it. That same world that had once praised him now whispered his name with suspicion. There was a night when he sat in his dressing room after a show, still in his suit, makeup lights dimmed. He stared into the mirror, and for the first time, he didn't recognize the man staring back. The laughter that used to echo backstage now sounded hollow. He had everything, yet it all felt borrowed, a stage built on sand. The reflection in the mirror asked him silently, "Are you still afraid to lose it all?" He thought about the words from the Qur'an again. What is with God is better and more lasting. The words hit differently now, because the cost of truth had finally reached his doorstep. Rumors began to circulate. Steve's changed. He's acting strange. He's talking about Islam too much. He would smile, deny, deflect. But inside he was breaking, not because of what they said, but because he finally understood how blind he had been all those years. He wasn't angry at them, he was angry at himself. He started withdrawing from the noise, spending more nights alone, reading, praying, searching. There were moments when he'd wake before dawn, not knowing why, and feel something urging him to kneel, to pray like the Muslims did. The first time he tried, he didn't even know the words. He just bowed down, forehead to the ground, whispering, "God, I'm here." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't scripted. But in that imperfect act, he felt more sincerity than in all his years on stage. There was a peace there, raw, like the sound of rain on glass after a long drought. But peace is never without battle. The more his heart leaned toward truth, the more the world seemed to pull him back. Agents warned him. Friends avoided him. Producers smiled less. You don't want to go down that path. One of them said, half joking, half serious, "You'll lose everything." He laughed softly, not out of amusement, but out of disbelief. The word echoed in his mind. What was everything? The fame, the money, the applause? He thought of those who bowed 5 times a day with nothing but dust beneath their knees, and they were happier than he'd ever been. Maybe everything wasn't what he thought it was. There was one man who changed everything for him, a scholar he met by chance in a quiet mosque in Los Angeles. The man's beard was white, his face calm, his eyes carrying decades of wisdom. He didn't ask Steve about fame or fortune. He just asked, "Do you really want peace or do you just want comfort?" The question cut deep. Peace was not comfort, it was surrender. And surrender meant giving up control, pride, ego, all the things that built his career. They talked for hours. The man spoke of the Prophet Muhammad, not as a distant historical figure, but as a living example of mercy, patience, and humanity. He told him about how the Prophet forgave those who hurt him, how he cried for his people at night, how he lived simply despite having the power to own the world. Steve sat there, silent, tears forming in his eyes, because for the first time he wasn't hearing a story. He was hearing truth. That night, he went home and couldn't sleep. The stories replayed in his mind like scenes from a film. The cave of Hira, the call of raid, the nights of prayer, the struggles, the forgiveness. It all felt too real, too powerful. He realized this wasn't just history. It was guidance, timeless and alive. And yet, even with this growing love, he hesitated. The weight of reputation chained him. The fear of judgment lingered like smoke. He could feel the invisible hands of the world pulling him back to the comfort of silence. But silence became suffocating. One evening, he sat by his window as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. The sky turned red, then purple, then black. He whispered, "God, I'm scared." The wind outside seemed to answer, carrying the faint echo of a call to prayer from a distant mosque. He closed his eyes. Allahu Akbar. The sound filled the air, filling the void inside him. He wept, not from sadness, but from surrender. The walls around his heart crumbled. The pride melted away. For once, he didn't want to be Steve Harvey, the celebrity, the host, the icon. He just wanted to be a servant. In the following days, he disappeared from the spotlight. People speculated fabricated stories, filled tabloids with rumors. Some said he was sick, others said he was losing his mind. But none of them knew the truth. He was healing. He began attending the mosque quietly, sitting in the back observing. He listened to the Qur'an being recited. The sound, rhythmic, divine, ancient, washed over him like waves cleansing a shore. He didn't understand every word, but his heart did. Every verse felt like it was written for him centuries ago, waiting for this moment. He saw people from every walk of life, rich, poor, black, white, Arab, Asian, standing shoulder to shoulder in prayer. No hierarchy, no fame, no ego. Just humanity before God. That sight broke him. The unity, the humility, the peace. It was everything the world outside was missing. One day, an old man beside him placed a hand on his shoulder after prayer. He didn't know who Steve was. He simply smiled and said, "Brother, may Allah bless you." That word, brother, struck him harder than any award ever had. In that one word, he found belonging. As the weeks passed, he learned to pray properly, to recite small verses, to understand what submission truly meant. Every prayer felt like a conversation with his Creator, raw, intimate, real. The more he prayed, the lighter his heart became. The burden of years of arrogance began to lift. But his past was not ready to let him go. Offers dried up. Interviews vanished. The same people who once fought for his attention now avoided his calls. The media began spinning their own narrative. Steve's lost his edge, has gone religious, is out of touch. He watched silently, no longer angry. Because now, when you choose truth, you must also choose exile. There came a day when he stood before a small audience in a community center. No cameras, no glamour, just a few people seeking faith. He spoke about his journey, about how arrogance blinds the heart, about how truth demands sacrifice. His voice trembled at first, but then steadied, carried by conviction. "People told me I'd lose everything," he said. "But I realized you only lose what was never meant to stay." The room fell silent. Some wept, some smiled, but all felt it, the raw sincerity in his voice, the story of a man who had finally found peace and surrender. Yet even as his soul found light, the world around him grew darker. The backlash intensified. Old friends turned cold. Journalists dug into his past, twisting his words, mocking his faith. But he no longer fought back. He had learned the art of silence, the same silence that prophets carried when misunderstood. In the quiet of the night, he found solace in the prayer mat, whispering verses that had once been foreign, but now felt like home. He would sit for hours, his forehead pressed against the ground, whispering, "Alhamdulillah. Praise be to God." For the pain, for the loss, for the truth. One night, after a long day of inner turmoil, he dreamt of standing in a vast desert. The wind howled, sand swirling around him. He looked up and saw a light, distant yet bright. He began walking toward it. The journey was endless, the wind fierce, but something urged him forward. When he finally reached the light, it wasn't fire or flame, peace. He woke with tears streaming down his face. He knew what it meant. The path was clear now. From that day, his life transformed quietly. He no longer sought validation. His prayers became his comfort, his tears his language. He began to speak differently, slower, more reflective. People noticed. Some laughed, others listened, but he didn't care anymore. The truth was no longer something he needed to prove. It was something he needed to live. He started visiting orphanages, helping quietly, away from cameras. He saw beauty in service, the kind of joy fame had never given him. He remembered the prophet's words, "The most beloved people to God are those who are most beneficial to others." That became his mission, to give, to heal, to love. But deep within, a storm still brewed. There were nights when doubt crept in, whispers of the past, shadows of fear. "What if you're wrong?" the voice said. What if you've lost everything for nothing? Those nights he'd open the Qur'an, searching for comfort, and always, the words answered him, so remember me, I will remember you. He realized faith wasn't about never doubting. It was about fighting through the doubt, holding on when your hands are trembling. As years passed, Steve began to see how the world's illusions faded. Fame, fortune, applause, all temporary. But peace was eternal. He visited Mecca one year quietly without announcement. The first sight of the Kaaba broke him completely. Thousands of people moving as one, dressed in white, circling the house of God in perfect unity. No names, no ranks, no egos, only hearts beating to the same truth. He stood there, tears streaming down his face, whispering, God, thank you for breaking me before blessing me. In that moment, everything came full circle. The nights of confusion, the fear, the loss, the isolation, it all led here. The darkness had been necessary. Without it, he would have never found the light. When he returned, he no longer feared the world. He spoke openly about his respect for Islam, about how it changed him. Not everyone understood. Some mocked, some criticized, but others listened, and that was enough. There was a calmness to him now, something unshakable. He smiled more, spoke less, prayed often. The man who once needed applause now found joy in silence. And yet, behind that peace was a man who had walked through fire, who had lost everything to find himself. In the end, he realized something simple, that faith is not a destination, but a journey. One filled with storms, doubt, loss, and surrender. But if you keep walking through the noise, through the pain, through the fear, you'll find what he found that night under the stars. Peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't fade with fame. The kind that only comes when you whisper, I was wrong. And finally, I surrender. Saying as he stood before the mirror again years later, older, wiser, softer, he smiled. Not the smile of a celebrity. The smile of a man who finally found what all the world's wealth could never buy, truth. Because in the end, it wasn't about Islam being different. It was about him being blind. And once he saw the light, there was no going back. Steve Harvey, once the loudest voice in the room, had finally learned the beauty of silence, the silence of peace, the silence of truth.